So for those of you lucky enough not to know me, I am a client platform engineer and community advocate for Fleet. I am a grizzled ancient, apparently, I've been told, with 25 plus years as a Mac admin and consultant. Formerly, I was an Apple reseller, service provider, managed service provider, but most importantly, I bake sourdough bread.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brock Walters. Just want to make clear, the JD's picture should have been up on the screen before. This is his presentation. I'm just here as his lovely assistant. Some of you may know me from having taken Jamf classes from me in the past. If you've taken Jamf certification classes, sorry. Not that they're not great, they're fantastic classes. And I worked at Jamf for 5 years and delivered the courses and created content there. I've also had various engineering roles, and now I'm super happy to be working at Fleet. So today we're going to talk about some GitOps stuff.
Yeah. All right. So we called this Streamlining MDM with GitOps. Sorry that did not make it to the schedule. I mean, I originally was going to call this Too Legit to Git. And make this entirely MC Hammer themed and force you all to sit through that. So if you want to manage devices, let's get it. In the words of MC Hammer, you can't touch this. So I'm going to save you from all of that, maybe, and we'll move on from there. So unless you've been living under a rock for the last decade, you know that device management, MDM, is the process of monitoring, managing, and securing all of the devices in your org. For this, it brings its own set of complex challenges, including scalability, consistency, security, and just overall complexity. So, for example, deploying configuration updates across thousands of devices, ensuring every device is compliant with security policies. This is daunting, right? So that's where we can bring GitOps in and provide a more streamlined and automated way to handle some of these challenges. So the requisite XKCD cartoon is here about Git. But GitOps is essentially a methodology that uses Git repositories as the source of truth for managing your infrastructure. And this is often referred to as infrastructure as code. And by using Git as that single source of truth, we're able to automate deployments, updates through version-controlled configurations, and this enables consistent, reproducible deployments. And in the long run, it simplifies the management of our device fleets and just helps make sure that everything stays consistent and traceable for that. So I'm going to touch briefly on Fleet. The beginning part of this presentation really has nothing to do with Fleet. What we're going to talk about, you can do with all of the MDMs out there that have an API. But for those of you who are not familiar with Fleet, Fleet is an open core cross-platform solution that provides real-time insights and management for all of your devices using OS Query. We're essentially the easy button for OS Query. We're designing Fleet in such a way that it bridges the gap between GitOps principles and device management. We'll get into this in a little bit, but we actually have a GitOps procedure built into the Fleet control management tool, so that whether you're managing Macs, Windows, Linux, or even Chromebooks, we have a unified management interface for that. That will provide you real-time insights into your fleet. And you can use Git as the source of truth for managing all of those configurations and software deployments. So with all of that said, and the fly that's flying around here annoying us, thank you very much, flies. We'll get started by actually setting up a GitOps environment for you. Now, this is not a play along. We got 20 to 35 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever. Depends on how fast I talk to do this, but hopefully this will serve as a little bit of a reference for you later on when you review the video. We'll take a look at managing configuration profiles with GitOps, a little bit about continuous integration of the CI part of CI/CD, and then we'll look at a case study of using Fleet's public device management repo. And if there's time, we'll have a little Q&A session. So setting up your GitOps environment. This can easily be done with Xcode select -- install. If you have brew, you can also install Git from there. I don't care how you get Git, but get your Git. So by default, you're going to want to set a couple of configurations. One, your username, the other, your email with these commands. There are GUI tools that surround all of this. I'm covering the command line tools because they're the most universal, but there are a lot of options out there for actually interacting with Git today. So Git repositories can live either locally or locally on your machine or on a remote server. Local repositories are great for testing, home labs, personal projects. But when it comes to collaboration and version control, remote repositories are kind of where it's at. They can be hosted on platforms like GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, and that gives you additional features like issue tracking, pull requests, CI/CD integration. GitHub is pretty popular for open source projects. That's where Fleet lives and offers GitHub Actions for automation. GitLab has powerful built-in CI/CD capabilities as well. It's often used for enterprise projects due to its robust security features. Bitbucket integrates pretty well with any of the Atlassian tools. So those of you who are maybe using Jira already, this makes an ideal choice because you've got that integration right there for you. Linking your local repository to the remote one is a pretty easy command of doing a remote add of the origin to your remote repository, and then do a git push to the origin. And if I'm speaking Greek and this sounds weird, just come back to these slides and refer to it, or use a GUI somewhere where it does all of this for you. So we've got Git configured. Let's look at a simple example of managing configuration profiles for your MDM. And like I said before, this will work with any MDM. Taking these steps to manage your configuration profiles and have some version control on that is going to help you a lot into the future. So we all know what configuration profiles are: mobile config files or JSON files for DDM. What we're going to do with this is version control. We're going to track changes using git commits. We're going to make pull requests and provide some approval and oversight of what we're doing. So we're going to have somebody check the work. So we're going to show this a little bit later. Brock's going to make a pull request. I'm going to check what he's doing. And then we're going to go ahead and push that onto our configuration. This also gives you a lot of other capabilities. You can roll back. How many people have sent a configuration profile out and went, exclamation, 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 right? So as long as you haven't, expired all your SCEP certificates and can't talk to any of those devices, you can probably roll back and get back to a previous configuration because you have all of that. And essentially, you're building yourself a backup of all your configuration profiles. You have the ability, and we'll show this in a little bit, of being able to see what's changing and why, because you're documenting that along the way. So when I set up my GitOps configurations, I like to use some organizational best practices. These best practices are mine and mine alone, but they can be yours as well if you want to adopt them. You may have better ones. I'm open to suggestions here. Because Fleet tends to be not just Mac, but Mac, Windows, Linux, and Chromebooks, I preface everything that I'm doing with Mac OS, mostly because alpha sorting just floats all of those together for me. And then an actual good solid name of what I'm configuring. So in this case, Wi-Fi configuration or software update settings. I like to organize these in folders as well, just to help me a little bit for that, and helps with grouping and things like that. Git comes with a very powerful tool called Git diff. This allows me to see all of the changes that are happening. I can focus this on an entire directory. I can look at commit to commit. I can look at a specific branch to see what's changing. So this allows me to see that, in this configuration, I'm changing the old SSID to new SSID as bananas. We have to have banana references in all of our presentations. Git blame is probably my most favorite command in the Git universe, and this is because you get to see who did what. And because that's always the question, who did this? Who pushed this profile out there? If you're tracking this in a Git repo, you know exactly who made the commit and shows line-by-line annotation of who made the commit, the time date stamp for that, and the ID of that.
And JD just likes blaming people.
I do like to blame people. It's mostly my fault, though. So let's get into, so if you've done all of that, right, you're just doing that. Ignore continuous integration. You're just putting everything into a Git repo. You're going to be light years ahead of most organizations, because most organizations don't have a backup right now of their configuration profiles. Who does? Right? There's not a lot of hands going up in the room. Who is relying on their MDM vendor to just have a copy of that, and it's just going to be out there for the rest of eternity, right? Yeah, I saw those hands shakily go up. Don't do that. Basically make a backup for yourself of those configurations. But we can take this a step further and look at automating the application of these configuration profiles using continuous integration. So we're going to do this with GitHub Actions. You can do this in a number of different ways for that, but essentially it's pretty straightforward. It's a workflow YAML file that lives in .github/workflows directory. This file basically defines the triggers for the workflow. So whether it's a push on the main branch or a pull request, we'll kick off various processes based on that. So the next thing we want to do is configure some environmental variables. Environment variables. I'll learn how to talk one of these days. I'm from the US. I still can't speak English. You're welcome. So things like your MDM URL, your API token, these should be stored securely in a GitHub secret to keep your credentials safe. Do not, I repeat, do not hard code these into your API, hard code your API key into your GitHub Actions file. I'm going to repeat it again. Do not hard code your API key into your GitHub Actions file. There's a lot of them out there. So if you want to go spelunking one day through public archives and looking for API keys, you're going to find them out there because you don't want to be that person. So please do not. Anyway, moving on. Next, we're going to define the job. So we want to define the job. This can be whatever you want to call it. I'm calling it an apply config. And we're also defining what we want it to run on. In this case, we're just using Ubuntu latest for that. The next is the steps that we're going to take. So for a checkout repository, we're going to call an action that exists called action/checkout version 2. And then beyond that, we're going to basically define what we want to do. We want to apply configuration changes. So for this workflow, we're just going to use the curl command to call the API and make an API request and pass along all the configurations that are sitting in basically lib/star.mobileconfig. So I'm using the Fleet API here. You can substitute your API endpoint here. Again, do not hard code your secret for your MDM API token here, please. For bonus points, you can also add an optional step to send yourself a Slack ping, because we need more Slack pings in our life. If this fails for some reason, it's always good to know if your automations are failing for some reason. So this is a pretty easy way of doing this. There's a lot of different examples of how you might do this, but again, we're just making a call into Slack's webhook to do this. Again, hide this stuff in a secret. Don't expose your Slack webhook URL out there, or you'll get some interesting webhooks and interesting messages in your Slack. So to get the most out of this continuous integration setup, it's important to follow some best practices. First, I'm going to repeat this again, GitHub secrets. Use those to store sensitive information like the API tokens and the URLs. out there. Rotate these occasionally, and just do that for maintain security. Not every 10 days, but fairly regularly. Second is to implement a robust pull request review. So this is a little bit more complicated and a lot further than we want to dive into for a short talk like this, but you can essentially put code owners on various portions of the file. So, and we'll see this a little bit. Certain people are asked to review that because they actually own that code when other people make a pull request against that. And that basically requires oversight so that I can't just push stuff into production and watch the world explode. For larger environments, you might want to consider staging and a staging branch. You might have a secondary instance or your MDM instance where you might actually test things before you put it into production. It's a theory. I like testing in prod. We're going to test in prod today because we live wildly and everybody's asleep where we're going to test today. Again, regularly monitor workflows that are happening in the GitHub Actions. Check the logs for errors. Set up notifications like we showed to let you know if a workflow fails. And lastly, document your workflows thoroughly. The whole point of this is documentation at the end of the day. It helps your team understand the purpose and function of each step in your CI process. It also helps the future you when you come back to it and say, what the hell was I thinking when I did this? You hopefully will have documented that and put some comments in there to help you out. So let's pull this together with just kind of a simple overview of how this would work. So essentially, we're going to create a branch for the changes that we want to propose. We're going to make those changes and commit them to that branch. We're going to push that branch to the remote repo. And then from there on the remote repo, we're going to create a pull request, also known as a PR. And at that point, we're going to ask for others to review that PR. Once the approval has been given, we'll merge that PR, and that'll kick off the CI process that'll basically make the changes by calling the API and pushing that in. So to get you started with this with Fleet, and really this repo is a good generic setup for anybody structure-wise. There are some Fleet-specific things in there. Fleet does offer a public GitOps example repo at github.com/fleetdm/fleet-gitops. This repository is a template. It is not carved in stone. It's very dynamic and changeable. We have a .github directory containing some example GitHub action workflows in there. We also have GitLab configurations in there as well for you who might be using GitLab. The lib directory is the core of the configuration management for this setup. It holds subdirectories for things like profiles and queries and policies. And this is where you can store device-specific configuration profiles, OS query queries, policies for enforcing compliance. And if you're using the paid version of Fleet, we also allow segmentation through teams, and that would be the teams directory that's in there. If you're not, please use the open source product. It's free. As long as you're willing to pay to host it, you can just delete that teams folder. You don't need it. You'll also see a default YAML file. These are actually YAML configuration settings for Fleet itself, but again, if you're not using Fleet, go ahead and cull that out too. Understanding the structure is key to managing your configurations effectively. Just basically put the same types of things together. It makes your CI process a little bit easier because you can just look at a single folder to pull a policy, query, or profile. So to use the example of the GitOps repo, you can start by cloning to use this example repo, sorry. You can start by cloning the repository. Again, you can safely delete that teams folder if you're not using a paid product. for GitHub, add the required secrets in secrets for that. And then if you're using GitLab, again, we have a GitLab-CI YAML file out there for GitLab-specific CI/CD. So after you push your changes to GitHub, you can apply, this will automatically apply the latest configuration to Fleet through this workflow. The little caveat here is you will have to run it manually the first time, just kind of set up all the boundaries and bumpers of this process, but after that, the CI process should take care of that. And this setup ensures that your fleet is always in sync with everything that you've configured in that repository. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Brock for a little bit of a case study.
So we're getting very short on time. We will get through some of this stuff as quickly as we can. I'm going to skip over this one. So this is what the actual commit looks like for the YAML. You can see it's got environment variables and ready to be uploaded. We do have a binary that is a command line tool called fleetctl or fleet control. This has a GitOps verb, which allows you to directly interact with the API using this tool. This is what a typical workflow looks like. So there's someone that's going to push up code that's typed out or copied into a GitHub file, and it's pushed up. There's an approver for this. JD was talking about that very, very typical workflow of someone making a request and someone who's a code owner approving that pull request. And this is, again, a really great way of not only having a backup of everything that you deploy, but also of making sure that peers get a chance to review everything that gets deployed. That's a very important part of the process. JD and I are both old enough to be terrified of live demos, and it probably would have taken too long to actually do this live demo in our slot. So we have a number of screenshots here to show what it looks like on GitHub. This is the creation of a new branch for creating the PR. This is the actual JSON that contains the DDM profile itself. In this case, we're setting a passcode. And that is a marvelous transition to showing what's actually going to get pushed up. This is the YAML file where we're actually showing the file is being added to the repo. This is what it looks like on GitHub, where you can actually see the change that's being made. So this is what the approver is actually reading to determine whether or not this change should or should not be approved. So if you've never seen GitHub, if you haven't used it yourself, this is really the idea. Everything shows up in a text editor, and you have the ability to approve it or to ask for changes. This is a very important part of any Git procedure, making sure that you have good commit messages. JD was talking earlier about future you. Good commit messages are good hygiene for any sort of version control system. And this is what it looks like when you run in fleetctl what we call the dry run. This is a very common concept. rsync has the concept of a dry run. Lots of binaries do as well. Basically, this will tell you everything that's going to happen when you push up your files so that you know before you do it if it's okay to do it. And this is just showing that the changes are approved. Git has some funny terminology like squash and merge. What do all these things mean? Luckily, there is a sense in which the GitHub UI kind of abstracts some of this away from you, so it becomes clicking buttons and making it easy to use for anyone. And we're now into the demo. Do you want to keep going?
Do you want to do the demo?
Yeah.
All right, we'll do the demo.
Did I get to too? I got too legit to quit too early.
That's all right. So we're gonna find my cursor. There it is. So Brock's put this pull request in here. I can look at the files that are changed here, so I can see that we're going to create this passcode settings JSON, and it's been added to our workstations team. So I can go in here and do a review changes for this. I'm just going to approve and do
the standard issue.
The standard looks good to me. We're going to go ahead and submit that review. Now, with this setup, so I've approved this. I'm a code owner for this, and so it's been approved here. Now, I have the option. I can go ahead and squash and merge this. Sometimes we like the original committer to push the button. I've been around pushing buttons for lots of years, so I'm going to go ahead and push that button, and I'll confirm what's happening. So what I want to show you as part of this is that it's actually kicking off Docker Hub here. So if where am I going? It's a live demo, so here. So here's the actual published job here. So we can actually look at the runner for this and see everything that's happening as part of this. So you can actually examine, this is where you would go to examine anything that's happening for that. So we can actually look at this entire runner here, and we can actually see this in progress. So we have a lot of things that are going on here. It's building the environment on the fly, and then going to go ahead and build a Go releaser and some other things that are more related to Fleet than to actually, pushing this configuration to your MDM. But the simplified example that I gave at the beginning of this, where you're just calling your API for your MDM provider and doing that, you'll see a lot less of this. This is very flashy and over dramatic for what we're actually doing. The part that we actually care about will be right after the published Docker images. There's lots of scary things, warnings, and whatnot, because stuff hasn't been updated in some of our run files. But eventually this will run, and we will get in system settings here. Thank you, Apple, for renaming everything to find that. So in here, we should see eventually another configuration, the DDM configuration for passcode settings will show up in here. And with that, if I can find my cursor to bring it back over here. So that's that. The whole idea here is to build transparency and documentation into your workflows around management and configuration profiles. Try and automate wherever you can, but also don't automate yourself into just managing your automation all the time, because then that's no fun. Experiment with segmentation for large orgs, so don't test and prod like I like to do, and build yourself a single source of truth for that. So I think, do we have a few minutes, or are we over?
We are over.
We're 5 minutes over. Well, sorry. That's that. Thanks. Come see us.
Thank you, Gavin.